I don't review with my mind. I forget that
he who reviews with his mind has forgotten the face of his father.
I review with my heart. They don't ever tell you what the hell he means when he says that makes you forget the face of your father or something. They repeat it a lot, and when we walked out, we're like, what the hell does that even mean?
They repeat the Gunslinger's credo a bunch of times. They bother to go like, both of our main characters have lost a father, and they never really...
The line doesn't make
touch
sense
on it much. Yeah, and you're starting to go, wait a minute, what? But you're killing all these people with a gun anyway. Like, like what if you didn't have a gun? Would you be able to still do something? Like...
What is happening, Reject Nation? It's Greg Elba here.
And it's John over here.
So we came back from watching the highly recommended and highly rated The Dark Tower. Oh, don't start off your reviews being sarcastic, Greg. Lamb. Because this movie sucks. If you guys don't know what The Dark Tower is about, basically, you know, there's this universe, there's the Earth, and then in the center of, like, the worlds, there's this dark tower that helps keep out bad forces.
Yeah, they represent everything by a ring, and at the center of the ring is the tower, and all the different realms and worlds and universes and stories live within this ring, and there's some unknown evil outside of it that the dark tower protects the ring from, and someone wants to destroy the tower.
And in this story, Matthew McConaughey's character, the Man in Black, otherwise known as Walter O'Dim, he wants to take down the dark tower, because he's like, think of him like the devil. That's kind of what he is.
Evil guy.
Evil guy.
A lot of magic and sorcery.
Who behaves like Matthew McConaughey. The Gunslinger, played by Idris Elba. Roland Deschain, who is someone who has this very specific beef with the Man in Black. And it's just his job as a gunslinger to help protect the Dark Tower. That's just his main job in life.
It's a calling, a vocation, an ancient duty.
Right, and that's all cool, but this doesn't really focus on that as the main plot when this movie sets up. It's really about this little white kid, right? This guy named Jake Chambers, played by this actor named Tom Taylor, who's actually pretty damn good in the film. Idris Elba, he's enjoyable. Matthew McConaughey, he's enjoyable, probably because I already like Idris Elba and I already like Matthew McConaughey, and I was excited to see them on screen. At the same time, though, they are kind of just one-note performances. I think both of them are.
This movie doesn't do any of its cast favors, but there are certain performances that are still pretty good.
And Tom Taylor as Jake Chambers, he's the only one who really has, like, emotional depth, which kind of gets canned here and there. No one in this movie is really responding to the stakes at hand. It really bothers me, especially with the Gunslinger and the Man in Black. They all have this, like, calm, cool approach to no matter how dangerous or scary or whatever the situation is, they're just there. Even Jake Chambers, he's like the emotional character in it, the one who he's the one who we're being introduced into this world through. But even there's times where his character's not really being so, oh my god, the world's about to end. You know, like I feel like no one's really responding to the gravity of anything.
Yeah, and the movie itself doesn't really do a good job of communicating the stakes or the suspense or the tension or the danger really itself either. So just none of that hits kind of ever. The whole plot of the movie, all the moments and big suspenseful things are all just kind of people just telling you what's going on.
Oh, this is like so expositional. It really feels like the four writers of this film had a beat sheet and they all said to themselves, what information needs to be said here? Who can say it? Alright, good, let's just write that information down. There's nothing, not a single moment in this film that's just left to body language, like giving it away or letting the audience figure. Everything has to be made laid out perfectly clear all the time.
And there's not a lot of extra dialogue for anything. There's not a lot of extra like character moments or even little thrown out things, which is why when they do show up once in a while, you notice them and you're like, oh, cool.
Yeah, there's these two plot lines here. The Gunslinger, he has a dad. His dad died, was killed by the Man in Black.
Yeah, his whole unit was killed.
Yeah, so he has a very specific vendetta with the Man in Black. He just wants to kill him. He doesn't even care about protecting the Dark Tower anymore. And the main character, Jake Chambers, his dad died, and the film starts off with having, like, expositional backstory on all that.
But here's a picture of me and Dad I'm gonna put back on the shelf.
Even the therapy scene he had. Disclosure, I've been in therapy for a few years. John goes to therapy. We know plenty of people who go to therapy. And even the therapy dialogue, well, even though it's in therapy, I'm like, this even feels expositional.
It sounds like you're trying to get information. Like,
Even in the therapy scene, I'm like judging it.
A real none of the conversation, especially for the first part of the movie, like none of the conversations feel natural at all, and there's not much the actors can do to make them feel that way.
And beyond it just being expositional, it's just bad dialogue. A lot of it is just really poor screenplay, right? This is adapted from Stephen King, his great epic source material.
And why
is the dialogue so conventional?
I've never read the Dark Tower books. I know about Stephen King, and I write.
Yeah.
So, like, I can't imagine he's pleased at all with this, because, like, there are 4 writers on this script that are credited, and it doesn't sound like any one of them did more than a first draft pass on any of this dialogue.
No. See, my understanding is that Dark Tower has a lot of description in it, and I feel like maybe the writers just kept taking description and just throwing that in as dialogue, instead of taking actual dialogue these characters probably have with each other from time to time. Supposedly there's a TV series still in the works, but watching this felt like I watched an entire series condensed into an hour and a half. Why is this only an hour and a half? Not that I wanted to kick it any longer with this movie.
Not that we wanted it to be 2.5 hours.
But you could have had time to flesh things out if you were under this like pressure to make it a 90-minute film.
If it's clear that your movie needs some extra TLC, I'll forgive you a short runtime, you know, expanding a little bit.
Because it's so plot-heavy information.
It just doesn't give you a chance or opportunity to care about anything.
I kind of feel like they treat the audience like we should already know a lot of this. Like, we should already care about this.
And at the same time, they take every moment to remind you of everything that's happened and everything that's at stake and blah, blah, blah. And it's weird because, like, if you look around at the rest of the movie, it seems like they forget a lot of the other important details elsewhere. Even physically, even in some of the sets and stuff.
The effects are surprisingly good. Like, the effects are alright.
The CG's pretty good.
The CG's pretty good. There's a very specific fight that goes down between Idris Elba and Matthew McCounaughey. Totally reminded me of like a video game type of fight. Gunslinger versus guy with like
sorcery. He's got like telekinetic powers.
Yeah, exactly. I thought like, special effects actually don't look too bad here. And the action scenes, Idris Elba, he kicks serious ass in the action scenes.
He's cool.
You know, there's one fight where he's actually like injured and trying to heal, and the way they shot that, and whenever he like would just whip out a gun and just casually shoot like these ninja-like characters was pretty sweet actually. And even the final fight was pretty sweet. I got harp on one moment though. There's you know that moment that they show in all the trailers where he's like, where he's giving the Gunslinger speech. You know, I don't aim with my mind, or he forgets about his father. But there's this one moment that they show in the trailer. He's going all Daredevil-like, and he's closing his eyes because he's trying to shoot the guy who took the kid. They show it all in the trailer. In the trailer, that scene's pretty sweet. It is.
And in the movie, at least for me, the scene is sweet. I thought that was one of the few scenes where we tapped into somebody, what's going on inside of somebody in a visual way, and it got intriguing for a minute.
What ruined that whole moment for me was right after when the guy gets shot. They show that where the guy got shot wasn't that far away from where the gunslinger was. That if the gunslinger just ran a little bit more, got into the open field where this kid was, he could have had just a clear shot instead of spending like 45 seconds just all this breathing stuff. I'm like, there's no point in doing all that, man. You just have to like walk over a little bit, find your opening, and shoot the guy. He wasn't far away.
It's really ruined by, that moment is really ruined by editing, because it's like he fires the shot and you see the thing, and then immediately the kid's there. And you're like, you should have at least given us a couple extra shots to show that distance happened. Because, you know, the scene starts and you're like, oh, he doesn't know where he is. He has to do this. And the scene ends and the kid shows right up and you're like, oh yeah. Well, he's just over there.
Yeah, exactly. You know? What was the point of all that?
I think some of the action's cool. I think some of the visual elements they bring in, especially in that scene, are kind of cool. But even the cinematography and the editing of this movie aren't that appealing, or they weren't to me. It's not like the angles are exquisite or anything. There are a lot of times where they're just kind of serviceable at best.
They had an element in there that had a couple of scenes that actually worked. They show you in the trailer, so I don't mind giving it away, where the gunslinger has to come to our Earth. He comes to New York City.
Jason takes Manhattan.
Yeah, and when they play out that scene, he becomes like Wonder Woman. He's the fish out of water who doesn't understand how any of this stuff works. And there's a couple times where it's really off and just kind of weird, and you could really tell that the writers were like, this is our fish out of water moment. And then there's a couple of scenes there that are actually really funny in how Idris Elba handles it, and so yeah, I thought that was fine. But this film is the definition of wasted potential at every given moment. You could have just expanded this out. Why not go for a 2-hour runtime? I don't get why you... I feel like an extra half hour would have done this movie a lot in order to flesh it out, give us some character scenes. Writing was just really awful. A lot of opportunity for more personal investment. The stakes are not felt yet. The stakes are technically huge, yet they're just nothing is felt. I don't feel anything when I watch this movie.
Well, they don't show you more than they tell you hardly ever, and sometimes they'll show you what they've already told you twice and tell you extra.
Yeah.
I liked Idris Elba, I liked the main kid, and beyond that, everything could have been better, you know.
Everything.
And it just depends on to what degree.
You know what it sort of felt like? A YA novel.
I guess so. Well, yeah, and then
I haven't read any of these YA novels. A YA novel adaptation. I kept thinking of like The Host in the beginning, because in the beginning when they're setting all this up, I'm like, it's actually pretty cool. That's kind of cool. But then as it progresses, it plays out like a YA adaptation.
If this was a YA book and we saw this movie, I would just be like, oh, okay, like it's another one of those. But it's like also it's coming from Stephen King, who I know like there are a lot of these books. It seems like a pretty thick mythology, and there are things in the movie that are cool ideas, you know, that are carried over and stuff. Yeah, it comes off more like that than a Stephen King novel.
Oh, totally.
You know?
I felt like this would have been a cool like YouTube movie that you know,
if
like just some dudes made and they put it up on YouTube, and I feel like we all would have been like, that's a pretty cool, sweet adaptation these guys made on a really low budget. Oh man, if they get some funding, they make it into an actual movie and really flesh this thing out.
Yeah. They don't have to worry about it being so economical.
What I was telling you for a couple weeks prior to any reviews or anything coming out on this film of why I thought it was going to suck. See, I was unaware of all the production problems this film had. I didn't know about any of that. What made me think this movie's gonna suck is the trailer. Not because the trailer sucks. It was because I saw that this is based on a Stephen King novel, and the trailer is a bunch of really cool action scenes.
Yeah.
And it made me go, the action might be cool, which it was here, but I don't think Stephen King just wrote 8 books worth of action scenes.
Yeah, he didn't write like a cool blockbuster with a sky portal.
Yeah, like when I'm watching like the crazy action scene at the end where Idris Elba's having his crazy shootout, I'm like, I don't think Stephen King wrote all that in the book. I just don't see him describing any of this going down. I felt like the studio probably did was they took this world, turned it into more of a cool action movie instead of really understanding what the source material is.
That's how I feel.
That's what I felt when I saw the trailer, just because, yeah, it's a cool trailer, action's cool, but I feel like the characters and the movies and suck, and McCounaughey is going to be rather like a one-note villain. And sure enough, it's exactly what the movie was.
Yeah, and then it ends up feeling like that sort of casting where you're like, oh, these guys are really hot right now. Everybody loves them. They'll be psyched to hear they're in this Stephen King thing. Let's bring them in. And like, I liked Idris Elba, even though he didn't have tons to do. And I actually like Matthew McConaughey less. It's like, I like him generally speaking, but especially as a main piece of this movie, you know, he's kind of chewing up the scenery, and none of his dialogue seems like it was gotten off set, you know.
And he looks weird.
He looks kind of weird. His hair keeps changing, and it's just like at a certain point, he just kind of looked like he showed up to play villain guy, and that's fine, but again, it just takes away suspense, and it takes away, you know, things to get really invested in. It's not surprising. And seeing Matthew McConaughey, you know, being this mysterious man in black, like, you want some kind of really cool character performance, and there are hints in the backgrounds of other scenes where he's like talking to orbs and doing magic, and those things are neat, but we just never get to know him, you know, beyond that, and so he's just kind of a villain.
For the film that tries to build a Stephen King universe, what an insult. To like Stephen King. Oh, your 1408 references and your Shining stuff, and like, oh, come on, man.
I feel like you owe it.
This feels nothing like Stephen King. This feels like what Universal did with the Dark Universe. Like,
I feel like you owe it to really any writer, but especially a writer as prolific as Stephen King. If it's Stephen King, especially right now, or Tolkien, or whoever, C.S. Lewis, you should make sure that the writing of your script is also a priority.
For rating system time, I guess if I were to give it a rating, my rating would be, since we make these up every week, wait for it to come out on one of your internet streaming devices, where you're already paying monthly for something where you get access to a bunch of movies, and then they just add the Dark Tower to it. that's when you should watch this movie. I wouldn't say go out and rent it at a Redbox. I wouldn't say go watch it in the theaters. I would say
when it hits Shudder.
Yeah, it hits Shudder, a movie where it doesn't belong on that streaming service.
Yeah, it's not really horror-y, I guess.
No, when it hits Netflix or Amazon Video, whatever, then watch it.
I give this movie like a revolver, like a 6-shooter revolver, but that only has 2 bullets in it.
Well, guys, what did you think of The Dark Tower? Did you read the books and love it, or did you not read the books and love it? Subscribe to The Real Rejects. Click that notification bell. John Humphrey on Twitter and Instagram. Go check out our Patreon.